Parts I understood. Didn't matter. Past all the garbage, all it amounted to was goodbye.
Companions have become one of the most iconic elements of the series, but they weren't even a part of the initial concept, as scripter Jesse Heinig recounted. Quote, "The original design for Fallout didn't have companions at all. Tim leaned more towards the notion that you are a lone wanderer in a dangerous wasteland. And you may cross paths with other groups, but you have to solve all the problems yourself, and there is nobody else to go along with you. Late in the design, I fiddled around using scripts to make a companion work and got it like 75% of the way there, and Jason Anderson pushed for adding a few companions. I was used to playing party-based RPGs, so I felt that companions felt like a natural fit. And also the core mythology that inspired the game, movies like The Road Warrior, sometimes featured companions. Max needs the help of the gyro captain after all. It wound up being a very late development to the game that we got like 90% of the way there. With more time, we could have had a better inventory management system and a way to give companions better directions about not getting stuck or doing bad things in combat." Unquote. Tim's reasoning against companions was sound, considering the ending and the overall theme of loneliness that's a staple of the genre. Despite being a late addition and about as bare bones as possible, they really resonated, and improving them became one of the most common fan requests, leading to companions becoming one of the focal points of production. One of the most common requests revolved around their tendency to kill you almost as often as the enemy. If they happened to have a burst weapon, there was a damn good chance you were going to die. The first companion you're likely to recruit is Ian, and many players made the mistake of giving him an SMG early on. His proficiency at killing the player became one of the first inside jokes of the franchise and even inspired some of the series' first memes, to the point it's even referenced in the sequel multiple times. Tim Kaine recounted why this happened so often. Quote, "We didn't have a lot of memory or cycles, so we originally wrote a very minimal AI. In fact, I have to laugh these days when people complain about the AI in Fallout 1. They're always complaining about companion AI. We didn't even intend for companions to be in the game. The entire game was created and designed with no companions. And then one of the scripters wanted to have a dog that could follow you around. The scripter worked with Jason Anderson to figure out how that could be scripted and done in art. Once they broke down that barrier, all of a sudden, all the designers wanted to write characters who could become companions, following the player around. The AI was already working, and it worked pretty well against the player. Once we had companions who were trying to shoot the player's enemies, it wasn't as simple. That's what led to Ian started with an Uzi, which had a spread of bullets, but didn't check to see if anybody friendly was in that spread. That's why he's always shooting you in the back." Unquote. To address that, they instituted a new menu where you can customize their combat behavior. Though companions who had burst fire weapons are still prone to killing you unless you use very specific settings. Companions even have a degree of individuality in this system, where, for example, Sulik is too brave to be given the cowardly disposition, while Myron is so lacking in courage he can't be set to berserk. For the first time, the stats of companions could also be viewed. A consistent issue is them blocking you into rooms, sometimes forcing you to kill them or reload to an earlier save to escape. So they added a push function so you could move them out of the way, and this is one of the first things Tim fixed during development. Friendly Foe was a perk in the first game that highlighted allies in a green outline, but it was removed and made into a default aspect of the sequel. This was likely altered because of how confusing fights could get when your enemies and allies were using the same art. Yet another concern was how trading functioned. If you gave one of them items to carry and then tried to take the items back through the barter screen, you'd have to pay for them. You could get around this by stealing from them, but that wasn't very convenient, and item value during companion trading was removed. It was also confusing how carrying capacity worked in the original. Normally an over-encumbered NPC would have slower movement and less AP, but a bug caused bartered items to have no weight, meaning you could trade them any number of items. However, if you use the steal skill to plant items in their inventory while they're overweight because of the barter bug, you won't be able to plant any additional items. The barter bug was fixed in the sequel, making it so companions were no longer capable of carrying the entire world on their shoulders.
Sure, give me whatever you got.
When initiating barter with NPCs in the original, they say nothing. Sulik has some unused lines for this though, like, "Trading no problem, friend, but only got one Grampy Bone. Sorry, from now on you give 2 for 1 in trades." Just kidding. And, "What's ours is yours, friend." There's also a line for him being over-encumbered. It's too heavy, Fen. We like to dance away from the bad things. There are also some half-finished ideas that were never implemented. Companions aren't affected by radiation or poison, but Sulik has unused lines suggesting they did at one point, including, "Spirits think we and I may be joining them soon. Spirit of poison making home in me. Poison spirit moving in, moving out good spirits fast. Evil spirit is possessing his friend. Chunks of hair be falling out. And we and I glowing. Very bad spirit here." Myron has some as well, like, "Whoa, I'm feeling a little weak. Let's see, I'm nauseous, palpitations, fever, most likely poison. Could someone please suck this poison out? Why don't we just drink the radioactive goo next time? At least we'll die faster. I'm glowing brighter than New Reno at midnight, and great, a little radiation and I'm a human flashlight." This could have been cool, but having to manage poison and radiation on companions might have added too much micromanagement. There's also a variable in lines for several companions telling you it's safe or not safe to rest in a given location.
RL3 will maintain a tactical distance.
Like the first game, you can tell companions to stay at a short, medium, or long distance. It seems they tried a new distance though, as Sulik and Lenny have unused lines where you could ask them to scout ahead. Lenny also has a line where he'd say, "I can't do that, I'm not much of a scout," which makes sense considering he can't use the most aggressive dispositions. Myron will even suggest to send Lenny to scout ahead.
Miss Wright, I trust you'll do your best to put the safety of my master before your own personal gain.
Of course, Codsworth. Jesus. Lucky for me, those two things go hand in hand.
Companion interaction was very limited in the first entry, restricted to basic commands like asking for directions, telling them to put their weapons away, or floating text that would play in some locations. Aside from that, there's a single line where Katja will mention she hates dogs if Dogmeat is in your party, though during my test that line never actually played. This is the only endgame remnant of a system where your companions would interact depending on who was in your party. Katja has an unused line where she'd say, "That food smells good," to which Tycho would reply, "Yeah, if you like your lizard well done." There's also a line that would have played in Mariposa, where Ian would tell Katja the boneyard was worse than the military base. Some NPCs have special interactions while in your party. For example, Cassidy giving you some extra dialogue options when talking to Sergeant Stark, and Myron showing you where some hidden loot is buried. Having different combinations of companions will also result in some unique dialogue, as they make remarks about one another and generic NPCs fire off floating text about them, all of which was a massive improvement over the original.
You are such an asshole sometimes. Look, maybe you were like this before I signed up with you, but if you keep acting this way, I'm not gonna stick around much longer.
The original companions were also always on your side after recruiting them, regardless of your actions. This means you could massacre the citizens of Junktown that Tycho wanted to protect, and he would help you do it. Ian is the only one who can become permanently hostile, but this only happens if you kill the villagers in Shady Sands and then dismiss them.
Spirits be willing to talk. What you want?
In the first game, Katja has an unused line where you could ask her for advice. It's grouped alongside the rest of her companion dialogue, and perhaps she would have given you tips on the main quest. I think this idea was expanded for Sulik's lines where you can ask him to consult the spirits. Depending on the location you're currently in and the result of a luck check, he'll potentially give you useful but confusing tips about quest.
All taken to the great saltwater.
This was one of the coolest additions to the sequel, and it gave his character a lot of flavor.
Almost got it. There we are. Hell of a lot easier to do when the lock isn't on the other side.
Katja also has unique behavior where she'll open locks in dialogue, but there are only two places where it gets utilized. After attempting to open the door to Mariposa, she'll offer to unlock it for you. While in Doc Morbid's basement, she'll also open up a locker, though this interaction has a good chance of crashing the program. This whole concept feels very unfinished, as there's no indication you should talk to her about these locks, and nowhere else that it's actually used, meaning you can easily miss that she even has this ability. When nearing the secret door in the basement of the cathedral, she'll also note the bookshelf looks like it's hiding something before opening the secret door. She also has a cut line about disarming a trap. She's described as a thief, and I suspect they were trying to make her into a utility character who helped players who had low lockpick and trap skills, but never had time to flesh it out. For the sequel, companions were now given the ability to use skills outside of combat consistently. Sulik and Marcus have unused lines similar to Katja's, where you could tell them to repair, lockpick, or turn on objects. This suggests they initially tried to implement skills through dialogue again, but they streamlined it to where companion skills are used automatically when using the skill decks, assuming a companion has a higher skill than the player.
Can I make drugs? I'm Myron. What do you need?
The idea of utility allies was also expanded. Myron is nearly useless in combat, but his high science skill makes him viable for some player builds. He can even craft a variety of chems if you have the right ingredients.
You want to come with me, pal? Okay then, let's stick together.
In spite of being largely terrible, some companions like Dogmeat became fan favorites. Unlike other companions, he couldn't be dismissed, which led to him typically dying long before reaching the end of the game, something referenced in the Cafe of Broken Dreams encounter. So players made strategies to keep him alive, like locking him in rooms so he would avoid combat. Interplay producer Vince DiNardo apparently figured this out on his own, something also referenced in that special encounter. Tim Kaine commented on players' reactions to the Canine Companion. Quote, "The character people liked most was Dogmeat, because Dogmeat didn't have any area of effect attack. He would just run up and bite someone. He was seen as the companion that was the most people, but it was just, well, no. The AI worked great for him because that's what it was designed for. We had that kind of stuff that was really hard. We just didn't have the memory or the cycles to do anything really complex." That's when I first learned that how people perceive something that wasn't necessarily the truth. People would tell me, "I love Dogmeat so much because he's loyal." I'm like, no, you love Dogmeat because he has no dialogue attached, and because of that, he can never leave the party. Also, Dogmeat only does melee attacks so he can never hurt you. He would have hurt players as much as Ian or Tycho, he just never had the opportunity to do so. So, it was funny to me when people would say, "We loved how you made the dog so loyal." No, we didn't do that. That's just how things shook out. Unquote. Even the companions you could dismiss were still likely to die, as the only way you could improve them was by giving them a better weapon. Their default armor couldn't be altered, and so one regular fan request was giving them armor in the hope they could survive the dangers of a post-nuclear world. Lead designer Chris Taylor revealed this was something they considered for the first game, but that he had a much more metal vision of companions. Quote, "NPCs not using armor was my idea. 2 reasons. 1, they did not have the artwork available to actually be shown in the proper armor. 2, I wanted NPCs to die. The player starts alone and should end alone. Some people were able to make it to the end with their NPCs. That was pretty unexpected, but not out of the question. This may change for Fallout 2. It is the single most popular request, I believe. Bethesda would later end up making them immortal. I think this is pretty fascinating, and an example of how the original design of Fallout, like the time limit and very expendable companions, were more brutal than a lot of players would have liked. Though I do think its hardcore take was more accurate to the genre's themes. While they added companion armor, they never actually created unique artwork to show each companion in different armor sets though, eventually making them look the same regardless of what they were wearing. Even adding armor wasn't enough though, as the stats of the OG allies remained stagnant across the entire game. They also expanded them to level up periodically as you gained experience. When you level up, your companions have a chance of improving their skills, and doing so will improve their combat prowess and their passive skills. Some weaker companions like Lenny only have a few levels, but others have 6 stages of advancement. Unfortunately, a bug stops Sulik, Vic, Goris, and Dogmeat from ever reaching level 6. Regardless, these additions made companions much more viable than their predecessors. Some players also requested the ability to assign perks to companions like you can do for the player. In an early preview, lead designer Matt Norton mentioned, quote, "We are planning to allow some of the NPCs who can join your party the ability to improve existing skills, or learn new techniques during the course of your travels. The player and some of the NPCs will be able to find special mentor NPCs that can teach skills or other special abilities called perks." Unquote. This is even mentioned in one of the ads that continued to run after the game was released, but this wouldn't be present in the final game. Perhaps they could have learned new weapon proficiencies, like skills or crafting recipes, but the planned scope of this feature is a mystery. Fergus Urquhart also addressed it in a post-launch interview. Anyway, I had hoped to be able to have the player to go on quest and teach the party members what they wanted, and control their advancement a little more. It was something we just ran out of time for.
We've been trying to know which way to go to find slavers who take Sis. Maybe south.
Fergus mentioned going on quests to teach companions new abilities, and these quests were planned out to some degree. In Klamath, the player can find a tribal named Sulik. When talking to him, it's revealed his sister and several other tribe members traveled from their village to trade with a nearby tribe.
Sis went trading at another village and never come back. We and I go look for her.
But after arriving, they were attacked by an unknown group. All but one of them were killed or kidnapped, and the lone survivor told tales of the attackers' magic torches, potentially a reference to flamers.
One survivor, dude was in bad shape, said evil warriors came with magic torches. Fire would lick tribe warriors and they'd go to the spirit. The evil warriors tied up the rest and took off, Sis with them. Friend, we be finding her or dying trying.
There's a lot of overlap between this description and the explanation of how Arroyo was attacked, meaning they might have been ambushed by the Enclave.
The spirit was willing, but the spearheads were weak. The evil ones burned our warriors with the lights of hell. All were dead or taken. My spirit returned to flesh only to reveal the truth to the chosen.
A nearby trader, Vic, traveled to Sulik's village and offered information about the attackers. Sulik traveled to Klamath to find out more information from Vic, but Vic was missing and Sulik ended up enslaved after causing damage to one of the town's businesses.
We and I know they're slavers at Den. When we're free, we're out of here.
He states there's slavers at the Den who might have more information, but from there the trail runs cold and nothing else regarding the quest was implemented. He does have several cut lines about tracking someone or something, like, it went this way, they went that way, this is the path, we found the trail, and there must be another way.
The tribe's home is next to Great Saltwater. 2 moons from here, friend.
Sulik states his village is a 2-day trek from Klamath, and Maida mentions that his home, internally named Primitive Tribe, is to the southwest. There's nothing there, but they did set up a placeholder location that matches her directions. He also has a recorded line about arriving at Primitive Tribe before he rescued his sister.
Good to see you home, but not while Sis is still gone. It'd be one to stay in your company, okay?
There's also a placeholder for quests there as well, but nothing was ever added. We can infer a bit about the culture of Primitive Tribe from his dialogue as well. Sulik has a piercing using one of the bones of his grandfather, called Grampy Bone, implying some sort of ancestral pagan religion they follow. Other lines suggest a belief in karma and spirits that can be good or evil. These spirits represent various elements like water, fire, poison, sky, earth, and chaos.
We and I only use herb superb.
His lines imply that weed is an important element of their village and is possibly used in their rituals. Face tattoos may also be traditional. Interestingly, hostile primitive tribesmen can still be found by the coast, and another encounter includes a friendly fisherman. He mentions that before a big storm, they hurl spears into the ocean to show their bravery. If they have proven themselves worthy, the goddess rewards them with fruit. When storm season starts, they throw Brock flowers into the ocean, and the goddess gives them Xander root in return. After a good harvest, they throw part of it into the ocean as tribute, and the goddess sends them spears in the tide. Normally, he'll trade you items that have appeared in the tide, but if you have low intelligence, he'll tell you the goddess of the sea is waiting for you by the shore. It's possible this is another reference to Sulik's village, and perhaps this was one of their deities. This seems plausible considering the village was placed on a coastal tile. There's no remnant of how saving her would have been handled, but there is an unused keyring seemingly related to saving her, using a recycled art asset from the first game. Perhaps you would have rescued her alongside your tribe when assaulting the oil rig. After saving her, Sulik would want to continue traveling alongside you.
Sis found. We send her home. She's strong. Can make it fine. We want go with you. Grampy Bone say you have big path to travel.
If you agreed, he'd reply,
We do some buys and get you up on the road out.
However, you could also encourage him to take his sister home by saying, You should return to your village and make sure she's safe. I'll miss you, Sulik.
That'd be too bad. Tell you what, You been needing this stuff more than me. Walk well.
Afterwards, you could return to Primitive Village to check on him.
Being home is cool, but the place is looking a mite small now. We'd missed the road and the company of so fine a friend as you. Want us to walk by and by again?
His sister was never actually given a name as far as we know, but she was later intended to play a role in the cancelled sequel to this title. In Van Buren, her name was Karasu, based on the Japanese translation of Chris Avaloon's name, and she would have been the leader of the Blackfoot tribe. In a game full of unused ideas and half-finished concepts, this is probably the single most egregious example of how incomplete the final product is. Saving his sister accounts for a significant portion of his dialogue, and the quest never has any resolution. You can also find heart pills in Vault City. This item has no purpose in the final version, but it's possible it was related to Cassidy's heart problem. Giving him certain chems like Buff Out, Jet, or Psycho will cause him to have a fatal heart attack. But perhaps the pills would have stopped that from occurring. It's possible this was Cassidy's quest, but that's simply speculation. Vic finding his daughter in Vault City might have been his quest to learn new skills as well. Companion quests and rewards would have helped flesh out their characters and would eventually become one of the best elements of future titles. Not only were companions more versatile, there were also more of them. The first game only had 4, but the sequel would feature 14 permanent recruits. More companions ended up killing off a perk though. The first game had the Animal Friend perk, which made animals friendly as long as you didn't attack them. The skill wasn't that useful though, and they ended up removing it, only allowing the player to recruit a handful of pre-generated animal companions. Additional companions allowed them to rework charisma too. It was a nearly useless stat in the first game, but they altered it to affect how many companions you could have at a given time. This made it one of the most valuable options and is arguably one of the sequel's best improvements. In the script that handles companions, several missing NPCs are also mentioned. The Easter egg is a useless joke item, but it's mentioned in that script, and the guide suggests it once had a purpose. Quote, "Every game's got one. You just found Fallout 2's. Well, one of them anyway. This wacky item gives you a special friend. Found in random location, used in anywhere." Unquote. The description suggests you could have used the item anywhere to hatch a companion, but it can't be used at all. Leonard Boyarsky seemingly referenced the item in an interview. Quote, "An idea which may or may not have actually made it in, and may have been their genesis, was that you could find a Deathclaw egg and hatch it, and the Deathclaw would become a follower. The joke was that, in order to not have everyone freak out when you walked into town, you could put a cloak on him, which would have effectively made him look like a slightly larger version of a normal NPC in a cloak, with a hidden face. When combat started, he would throw off the cloak and inexplicably grow to his correct size. This was suggested as a way we could do it without adding animations for him. We could just use NPC animations, and as a way to not add restrictions for walking into town with him. However, you need to keep in mind that a lot of ideas started out silly, just to make us laugh, and we would evolve them into their darker versions as we went. I have no idea how the Deathclaw follower would have played out had we stayed, but he wouldn't have spoken. Despite being unused, this idea would seemingly lead to the companion Goris and potentially the name of the Deathclaw in MODOK, Chicken. Doc Jones is an NPC found in Vault 15. It seems the player could once recruit him after freeing him from the new cons. Carl and Johnny from MODOK were also temporary companions apparently, and perhaps he needed to escort them back from MODOK during the Ghost Farm quest. When attempting to sell Cassidy to Metzger, his name is stated to be McRae. The Bible expanded on this oddity, stating, "McRae was Cassidy's old name. Fergus originally called him that. McRae is also Fergus's middle name, or one of his crazy ancestors as it turns out. We changed it." Cassidy went through a crapload of names in the McRae-Cassidy transformation, but all the others sounded like pussies, so Cassidy it was. McRae was also a character in the Boneyard, one of many references to the dev team. Mira's name was originally Maria according to the party text file, but it also might have been a typo. In one of the images on artist Eddie Rainwater's portfolio, the file name for the image of Sulik is Sarlacc, the creature from Return of the Jedi. This might have been a joke or potentially an early name for the character. Considering how many pop culture references there are, it wouldn't be all that surprising if it was the latter. In early screenshots, Myron used a stock photo background. In this early image, Marcus's talking head doesn't have eyes yet. You're welcome for the nightmares. In the official guide, Matt Norton mentioned, quote, "One idea that I liked, but that didn't make it in, was the ability to get ghouls to turn into glowing ghouls if you got them to drink enough," unquote. This would later spawn an early fan rumor that you can make the ghouls at the harp glow by buying them enough booze. Interestingly, Marcus will tell Lenny that they should grab a drink together, and I can't help but wonder if this is the only in-game remnant of that idea. Mad Max was a major inspiration for the original team, and considering that, it's unsurprising a car was a common fan suggestion, though some fans did ask for bicycles and horses. By mid-December of '97, Tim replied to a fan question, revealing they already had ideas for multiple vehicles. By the time of the official announcement in mid-February of '98, that grand idea had already been shrunk down to a single vehicle. You couldn't technically drive it, but it did allow you to travel faster, helped avoid random encounters, and the trunk even acted as a portable container. Not only that, but there was a world-spanning quest to get the car running and to improve it. There was an animated addition to the world map while you traveled in it, and a unique song even plays while driving. While its final incarnation was relatively simple, it was actually conceived much differently earlier in development, in both look and function. There's an unused asset called Starter Part Car, potentially an early placeholder asset, though it's possible it's a remnant of having multiple cars. The first press release revealed its design was based on a modified 8-cylinder Chevy. One of the developers even gave the exact inspiration, a 1950s Chevy convertible converted to a hardtop. This wasn't the only design, however, as producer Eric DeMelt reminisced, quote, "Well, the look in Fallout has always been this retro, futuristic 50s look. So it's as if the 50s just stopped and then went on for another 30 years. But the style never changed. Initially we were going to use a more 60s looking car, and then we got all Mad Max. It didn't really fit with the look. And it didn't really fit with the sort of vacuum tubes and that kind of stuff we put in there. Everything is analog instead of digital in the game." Unquote. Fergus Urquhart then expanded on that. Quote, "Yeah, a Charger, or a car with really big fends. Yeah, we kicked around a lot of ideas." Unquote. Not only did the vehicle go through multiple early concepts, but it looked much different in early screenshots. In the final game, you need microfusion cells to power the Highwayman. But initially they didn't plan for the car to require fuel, as they didn't want the game to become a quest for gas. Matt Norton expanded on the original art. Quote, "The car was originally going to be powered by fusion or fission or something nifty, and nuclear, something that would allow us to not have to worry about running out of gas. And those big tanks in the back were representative of this big, bulky power source that was bolted on the back of a '57 Chevy." Unquote. The nuclear power source design was a remnant of much grander ambitions. As Matt Norton commented, quote, "We had thought, at one starry-eyed point, that the car would be something that you could upgrade with more speed, armor, weapons, etc., and that it could become a more important part of the game. Well, the engine and programmer tasking weren't up to the idea of having a moving vehicle. Madness, I know. In the game, so all of that went out the window. The power source was replaced by a much more mundane 22 cubic feet of cargo space, more than any non-wagon vehicle in its class. So basically, the Highwayman's power plant was downsized in order to meet with people's state of California emission standards. It's often the case that a prototype car isn't exactly the same when it goes into production." Unquote. Fallout 2 would later heavily affect the development of tactics, and an instance of that was multiple vehicles and vehicular combat. There's also placeholder art for an item called Car Fuel Cell, seemingly an item only intended for fueling the car. But later they decided to use microfusion cells instead. Amusingly, many players struggled to actually put fuel in the car, even though explicit directions were included in the README file. The devs had to encourage players to read it on multiple occasions, and several fan sites would even include pages dedicated to that information. The addition of the trunk ended up causing its own set of challenges, however, as programmer Dan Splitsley mentioned. Quote, "It was essentially a companion. So some of the companion behavior that every other character would use, and seem reasonable sometimes, would apply to the trunk, which is not reasonable. You have this trunk of the car that you can interact with and put stuff into. Periodically, something would break and the trunk would walk around with you like another companion. With the amount of development time you have, you had to think, okay, I've got this vehicle, and I need to be able to put stuff into it. What are all of the horrible things that could possibly go wrong trying to implement this using a system that was never designed to support it? You try to figure out as many of those as you could, but you were going to fail. Unquote. The walking trunk bug would be fixed, but the initial release had a common bug where the trunk would appear disconnected from the car, as long as the car had been left in a different location than you were currently in. Why did this happen? The trunk is a companion that joins you after you buy the car. Afterwards, the trunk is present on every map you travel to, regardless of if the car is actually there or not. It's only made visible when the car scenery is also present, but this glitch would have it appearing pretty much everywhere, including inside of buildings and underground. But you also had storage on most maps, and it was arguably more useful to just ditch the car out in the wasteland. One developer would later state the car caused so many issues during production that he hated it. There's a remnant of an unused cinematic showing the player starting the car, presumably after first acquiring it. According to Scott Everts, this cinematic was actually completed, but looks so bad that it was cut. This cinematic seems to be lost to time as it hasn't surfaced in the decades since its release. In one of the first official previews, Fergus mentioned something very interesting about the car. Quote, "One of the biggest things we are adding is the ability for the player to find, repair, and upgrade a car that they get relatively early in the game. The car will get them from point A to point B faster, and allows them to drive past random encounters if they choose to do so. Also, because of the car's speed, some quests will only be available to the player if he has it." Unquote. In the final game, there are no time quests requiring the car to start, however. There are a handful of time side quests, like fixing the liquor still in Klamath, being given a day to return after being told about the Salvatore Enclave deal, delivering food from Mom to Smitty, recovering Chip's spleen before he dies, and finding Carl for MODOK. That last quest is the only one you could conceivably need the car for, but you can still easily complete it on foot, and owning the car isn't a requirement to start it. It's too bad they dropped quests requiring the car because it would have given it some additional interactivity. There are several encounters involving the car, like running over lumpy and broken hills and Chris at Navarro commenting on it. But there's also an unused quest related to it. When traveling to NCR, a character named Doofus will ask you if you want to pay him to watch your car. Nothing happens regardless of what you do here. Originally though, you would have returned to find that all the items in the trunk of your car were missing. Confronting Doofus could lead you to the culprit, Merc, a local crime boss in NCR. You could try to threaten or kill him to get your gear back, but the dialogue is unfinished and it was seemingly scrapped pretty early in the design process. This could have been an interesting quest that temporarily punished the player for relying on the car's storage too heavily. Between being able to use the car in combat, a cinematic, additional encounters, and upgrades, it seems the Highwayman we got was a mere shadow of what they initially intended. Despite that, it resonated with fans nonetheless and would become a staple of fan art over the years, becoming one of the most recreated aspects of the classic games. Fan art was even featured in a review of Fallout 2, and it's easily one of my favorite depictions of the vehicle. It would then later appear in New Vegas in a secondary location. When asked whose idea it was, Josh Sawyer revealed he once planned for it to appear in Van Buren. Quote, "I wanted to have a Highwayman trunk full of microfusion cells and the tanker FOB in Van Buren." Unquote. The Van Buren version was also apparently a reference to another car bug in the sequel, as Chris Avallone recounted. Quote, "It's been a while, but off the top of my head, the crashed Highwayman encounter in VB was actually just the trunk of the Highwayman, to reflect the bug in F2 where the trunk would go missing. It also appeared in the Exodus tabletop RPG. Bethesda's lawsuit forced them to rename it as the Roadmaster Mark IV, but the art is definitely the Highwayman. Confusingly, it's mentioned by name on the next page though. The rules also imply the vehicle is half the size of a tank, which doesn't seem right to me. Compared to their original vision, the scope of both Companions and the Highwaymen were hamstrung by the pressures of production. Regardless, they remain one of its most significant improvements, that in some ways managed to stand the test of time nearly 3 decades later. Some of these changes would have made Fallout 2 into an even better game. Ultimately though, all of this was left on the cutting room floor.